Attendees are in listen-only mode.
All right, welcome everyone to the May 2017 edition of the HR Best Practices series by Thompson Co. My name is Kevin Mosher, and I'm a Certified Labor and Employment Law Specialist, partner at Thompson Co. up in our lovely St. Paul office, where it's not so lovely today, but that's okay. I will apologize in advance that allergies are affecting me, so if I have to cough here and there, I know that is annoying, but I will, nothing I can really do about it, or seemingly nothing I can do about it. So, for those of you who are new to the webinar series, welcome. On your right, you should see some sort of controls that allow you to send some questions. If you do send some questions during the webinar, I think today I should be able to answer them. There's a lot of, I don't want to use the word repetition, but there's a lot of overlap among these paid time off laws, and so I think we'll definitely have some time to address questions, so you're welcome to type them in. Then as time allows, I will try to get to them. If you have other questions after the webinar, you're welcome to reach out to me. My contact information is at the end. Otherwise, you know, I think you've got some emails and stuff in registering for this webinar, and you're welcome to email me or reach out by phone, and I'm happy to help you through anything. For those of you, so just finishing up the stuff on this, for those of you who are in need of HRCI, SHRM, certain CLE credits, those certifications should be sent over to you at after the completion of the webinar, and excuse me, after we confirm attendance and all that good stuff. If you are a member of the HR Hotline program, this webinar is being recorded, and it will be available on the website shortly after we're done here today. So you're welcome to have anybody else on your team, or yourself if you want to rewatch it, watch it on the members only website. Okay, paid time off laws. Here we go. We'll get into this. So, you know, paid time off laws are a fairly new thing. You know, a lot of employers, particularly in a professional situation or where there's, you know, a union involved where they've bargained over time off. You know, that's a lot of employers, not all employers, but a lot of employers give certain employees, particularly employees at work, let's just call it like 25 or 30 hours a week or more, pretty common for employers to give some sort of paid time off. A lot of anecdotal stories have occurred, have been present over the last several years, and they've been those anecdotal stories have been things along the line of part-time workers, workers in certain service industries, or workers who are, you know, making minimum wage, who are, instead of, you know, while they're sick, they're still showing up to work. They're losing daycare or they're losing their jobs because daycare is calling off. So there are a lot of anecdotal stories about low-wage workers, particularly low-wage workers in fairly structured, demanding jobs where there's not a lot of flexibility with their scheduling and attendance and stuff, where those workers have, you know, been telling their stories to people who are advocates for paid time off laws. And so a lot of these anecdotal stories, but it might be just a change in the way that the U.S. economy works with low-wage workers, you know, the demands on low-wage workers. But a lot of these stories have really been driving this this push nationally among advocates for paid time off and for, you know, employee rights and that sort of thing, have been really driving this, and they've had a lot of success. And what happens a lot of times, and we've talked, you know, I talk a lot about politics and kind of what's behind a lot of these laws and these concepts. And so, you know, this is, for those of you who listen to, you know, my webinars, you're probably not going to be all that amazed by my perspective on these things. But a lot of this, you know, came out of the advocacy that's been going on with like the $15 minimum wage and the Take Back Wall Street, you know, when they were protesting Wall Street. And so that was kind of the genesis, or of this newer movement of advocacy for employee rights, and it's gone into the $15 minimum wage campaign, and they've had a lot of success with that. And then now the paid time off in the last several years has been kind of the next step here along the evolution of employee rights advocacy. So unions are essentially going away, but a lot of these typical union type concepts, employee right type concepts that have been advocated by unions for a long time are going beyond a union context, and so we're seeing a lot of states, we're seeing a lot of cities, particularly cities on the coasts, or in the upper Midwest, I guess, that have more of a liberal bent, that you're going to find more employee rights. Those cities, there's been a lot of success in getting $15 minimum wage laws passed, and then a lot of other employee rights laws, including paid time off, and that's what we're going to look at today. So if you're an employer down in the South, outside Austin and a few other places, you're not likely going to be as affected by this, just because the voting population isn't seemingly on board as much with this $15 minimum wage and paid time off and stuff like that. But if you're if you have employees on the coasts, if you have employees in certain parts of the Midwest, mainly cities, and then on the West Coast, these are big issues that are being talked about, at like SHRM conferences and CLEs for attorneys and labor and employment attorneys. These are concepts that are ripe and that are really occurring. So we'll talk about a couple of so there are two main camps with paid time off laws, right? And so when I say paid time off laws, I mean laws that either the state, county, or local city government is coming up with to mandate that employers give certain amounts of paid time off to employees. And so there are two general ways that governments have gone about doing this. There's through an insurance program, an insurance type program, and we'll talk about that. And the insurance type program would be yeah, I think I've got a slide out, but it's like, think unemployment mixed with long-term disability or short-term disability insurance. So that's the sort of framework that we're going to talk about that's being implemented in New York, the state of New York. And so that's more of an insurance concept for repaying employees for the time off that they take. Versus what's much more common, the hammer, which is to mandate. So rather than creating an insurance type of product and scheme, having employers themselves be the front line and mandating that employers provide some amount of paid time off. And we'll talk about a lot of these schemes, and these schemes, are the most prevalent. So whereas you have the state of New York doing their thing with the insurance pool, the insurance program, you have most cities, counties, and states going into a, hey, we're just going to mandate that employers do this sort of thing. So we've all heard this before in HR, right? This is nothing new, as a concept of governments telling employers what to do with regard to HR. But on the paid time off thing, it's become pretty new. It's in the last 3-4 years, and a lot of the laws that were passed in the last 2-3-4 years, they're only now in like 2017 and then 2018 coming up, starting to take effect. So a lot of these laws are very ripe right now for going into effect. So, and then we're going to talk about some of the states beyond what's on this list right here, and then some of the cities. And we'll talk about just a lot of these concepts and how what employers can do. But really, it's much more of a, hey, this is kind of the framework that's out there. And what I would say is, and if you don't have employees in New York State or New York City or Massachusetts or Minneapolis or St. Paul or Seattle or Washington or Oregon or Arizona, I mean all these states that have some sort of paid time off laws that we'll be talking about. Every year this list grows. And so 2 years ago, if I had given this, it would have been half the size. If I'd given this webinar, it would have been half the size. The states and the cities that we're talking about doing. Minneapolis, St. Paul wouldn't be on there. Chicago wouldn't be on there. I think Washington State wouldn't be on there. It would be about half the size. You'd have California. California started doing something I want to say about 2-3 years ago. Massachusetts has been out there for a little bit. New York City's been out there for a little bit. But for the most part, this stuff's new, and the ball continues to roll. Now, a lot of the low-hanging fruit of these, more liberal cities and states has already been, plucked and taken advantage of, and so that, the advocates have won at a lot of these levels, where again, low-hanging fruit. But is this a concept that's going to spread to Cleveland, to Nashville, to Tennessee, to Virginia? To Florida, is the same sort of concept really truly going to continue and then just spread across the U.S.? Because what happens with so many of these laws is once one state or one city does something, well, then it's easier to kind of jump on the bandwagon and say, hey, that's working over there in California. Let's do that same thing in Massachusetts. And so like-minded legislators from these states, Minnesota will look at what California is doing. Illinois might look at what New York is doing or what California is doing. And so the question is this going to continue to expand? If I did this webinar a year from now, are we going to have several more states and cities that are looking at doing this? And I suspect the answer is going to be yes. This isn't the paid time off isn't a terribly overly political concept, particularly because in the last several years, one of the impetuses that's been really getting employers, the governments to roll with this, is because it became a little less political when the departments of health of a lot of these states and nationally as well, the departments of health came out and they've joined the advocates. I'm not saying that they're being advocates themselves, though it might seem that way, but the departments of health are coming out and they're saying, hey, this is a wellness issue that affects the state. It's affecting workers, it's affecting the states, it's affecting children, and we need people to not show up to work sick. It's better for overall public health if that's the case. And so that's why a lot of these states have gone this way. And so the question is, if it's easier to listen to somebody from the Department of Health talking about general health and welfare of the population of a state or of a city than it is to listen to somebody who was out there marching and one day carrying a $15 minimum wage sign and then the next day carrying we want paid time off laws sign, right? It's easier to listen to experts, to doctors, than it is to listen to advocates. And I think that these Department of Health advocates, professionals are a lot more persuasive. And so I think that's the question is, how persuasive will they be in some of these more middle America type states and cities? And my guess is they're going to be pretty persuasive. And you add that to the advocates, and I would not be surprised if this is just this paid time off concept continues to expand beyond the states and cities where it is right now. Okay. So competing frameworks, we talked about it slightly. So you've got insurance on one side, and the only place where we have the insurance being the insurance framework or scheme being implemented is in the state of New York, or will be implemented in the state of New York. It's been passed, but it hasn't taken effect. And then we have the employer mandate, which is by far and away what everybody else is doing. So, Chicago's and Cook County and California and Minneapolis, St. Paul, and, all these states that we're going to talk about, they are looking at the employer mandate. So with the insurance product, and we're going to overlap a little bit with what I talk about with New York, but what does the insurance look like? So the way New York is going to do it is that they are mandating essentially, an employer could be self-insured, or they could be not self-insured and using a carrier and everything. And so what an employee will do is the employee will take some time off that's covered by the law, and then the employee will make a claim with the employer, and the employer will pass it on to the carrier, right? It's not all that dissimilar from like some sort of disability insurance coverage that we might see with short or long-term disability with employees. And so the employer will make a claim with the carrier, and then the carrier will pay out the benefits, and then reimbursement will be sought from the state of New York. And the state of New York is going to collect taxes, premiums, essentially. So premiums are going to be paid in by employees through payroll deductions. They'll be paid in, and the premiums will go to the pool in New York. And so that's how this, an insurance type of program would work. So kind of like unemployment insurance, but really more because of the way that the application the application process works. The application process is not with the state. The application process is with the employer, and the employer then coordinates with the carrier to do this reimbursement. And we'll talk about the specifics of the reimbursement and coverage and everything in New York. But that's how New York came up with this insurance scheme. And a couple things are interesting in that to me. One, state of Minnesota, not this year, but last year, was looking at doing this, and Minnesota's not alone. Other states have looked at doing this. I just know firsthand, that Minnesota's doing it. And so Minnesota actually had competing bills at the legislature, where one was an insurance program, just like New York, just like this, where you create a pool and make a claim, and it goes to the carrier, and then there's reimbursement, and the state reimburses and stuff like that. So Minnesota was looking at that, and then Minnesota was also looking at the employer mandate, and the employer mandate is what we're seeing all over the place, and it's where it's requiring, the government's going to require that employers handle the whole thing. Employers give employees some amount of paid time off, normally based on the number of hours that the employee is working. So not just saying, hey, full-time employee, you're going to get 5 days off per year, but normally it's an accrual based on the number of hours that the person's working. And well, it sounds like, well, why don't we just, why don't states or cities just say, hey, you get 5 days off per year? But what these cities and states are doing is they're saying, no, you get like 1 hour off for every 30 hours that you work, or 40 hours that you work, or 52 hours that you work. So you're going to earn 1 hour off, and it's going to cover part-time employees. That's the problem. That's where the laws are really differentiating themselves from what employers typically do, because the laws are saying, no, you're going to accrue it based on the number of hours that you work. But how many employers out there give part-time employees who are working 15 or 10 or 18 hours a week? How many are giving them paid time off? It's not as common. So, few maybe, I don't know what the numbers would be, but it's certainly not as common as employers who are giving paid time off to full-time, 30, 40 hour a week workers. And so that's the employer mandate side of it. And so it was really interesting that the state of Minnesota had both frameworks pending at the legislature at the same time, and debates on both. And you can see my really cool picture. So it's like mozzarella versus cheddar. So it's kind of like the same. The state went with neither in Minnesota, but a lot of these states are choosing, and outside New York, which is kind of doing its own thing, the states that have gone this direction are choosing the employer mandate side of it. And I'll be really curious, if New York's program, this insurance-based program, if it works, if it's really awesome, I think it's going to be a complete failure personally. I don't think it's going to be funded enough, but that's personal opinion. We'll see. I am not an actuarial, but we'll see. I just don't think the premiums are going to be high enough to cover for all the employees that are going to need reimbursement. But we'll see how it goes. If New York is successful in doing this, we'll see if other states start jumping on the bandwagon. I think a lot of states are looking to see what happens in New York before they start going with that program. It's easy right now because governments are so used to just mandating that employers do things, like provide FMLA and other unpaid leaves and stuff. It's easy to say, like, to just create a scheme where employers have to provide paid time off, and that's what they're most of them have done. Okay, common themes. So one of the common themes and there are a bunch of common themes among here. But these are the common themes that I think you'll see as we look through these cities and states and stuff like that. So what's really common is that a lot of these laws are just basically looking at the FMLA, like what is a serious medical condition? What does the FMLA cover? Okay, if the FMLA is covering, that's kind of how they're defining when an employee can use this paid time off. So most of these laws, most of these states and stuff, they do restrict like when an employee can use the paid time off. So a lot of times it's only for sickness. It's not just to go fishing or go watch football or something like that. It's normally like paid time off to cover illness. And that's a very common theme. So if you're worried about, hey, giving more paid time off to employees so that they can go mess around and do silly things, no worries. Most of these laws are requiring that it's just for sickness, of course, assuming that the sickness isn't faked and stuff like that. A lot of the laws are also looking at when the person's using the paid time off for safety reasons, so for their own personal safety. And years ago, I've talked about this a few times over the years, but years and years ago, and when I say years and years, I mean off the top of my head, I want to say like 2006, I believe, Illinois passed a law that was kind of like it was like a side law with FMLA, and that side that's not a good way to put it, but basically what Illinois did was Illinois said, hey, covered employees can also take, in addition to like taking FMLA leave for their own personal sickness and stuff, they can take time off, unpaid time off. But they can take that time off for, excuse me, for their own safety. So if they have to go to court, if they have to get a restraining order, if they are, in an abusive relationship and they need to get out and they need time off to get out. So Illinois passed this thing where employees get some unpaid time off, and they can and it can be justified and used for these situations so that they don't lose their job because they're trying to get out of an abusive situation or go to court or something like that. So that was the first time I had heard about it, and I believe an early sponsor of that was President Obama when he was at the Illinois State Legislature. And so that was kind of, I don't remember if he was the author of it, but I know he was one of the sponsors of it. And so that concept seems to, whether it's because of him or probably not because of him, because I don't think he talked about it a ton at the federal level when he was president, but this concept of providing people with unpaid time off so that they can go to court and have, take care of, themselves in an abusive situation has passed on to this sickness and safety leave, these paid time off laws. So now we've got sickness being covered, so you can, for most of these laws, you can use the paid time off that you're given. You can use it for your own sickness or for a family member, like an immediate family member, and what an immediate family member is going to be defined differently by each city and state. But not just for your own sickness, but also for your safety or to help with the safety of an immediate family member. So if you need to go to court, if you need to testify, if you need to help a sister or a parent or whatever, go and get a restraining order, these paid time off, it's a common theme that these paid time off laws are going to allow you to use the paid time off for that reason as well. Normally, these laws are requiring advance notice. One of the things that we do see that's different among the states is who's covered. Some states will look at the size of the employer and they will say, okay, if you're an employer of X number of employees, you're a smaller employee, then either we're not going to mandate that you give paid time off, or we're going to mandate or we're going to mandate that you have to give a lesser amount of paid time off, versus larger employers which have to give paid time off or a larger amount of paid time off. So one of the we see this in a couple areas. One of them is in Minneapolis, for example, where the new law that takes effect on July 1 in Minneapolis says that, well, if you have less than, I think off the top of my head, less than 6 employees, then you still have to offer time off, but it can be unpaid. So less than 6 employees, unpaid time off. More than 6 employees has to be paid time off. So smaller employers aren't as widely impacted, but that's an common thing. So we have some states and some cities that differentiate on this rule. And the other area where there is some differentiation is with regard to other areas of coverage where the coverage might be determined by the number of hours worked. So while most states and most cities are looking at these laws and they're saying, hey, if any employee, I don't care if you're working 5 hours a week or 55 hours a week, you're going to be eligible for this accrual, because the accrual is 1 hour for every 40 hours worked. So you work 5 hours, you're going to earn 1/8 of an hour of paid time off, right? So time to celebrate. And so some of the states will say that, but there are some states and cities that are saying, hey, you got to work at least 10 hours or at least 15 hours on average a week, and you have to do it for at least, say, 20 work weeks before you're really going to be eligible for this. So there is some differentiation among the cities and states on that issue as well. So we've talked about some differentiation. Common themes that are on the screen here is the year-to-year carryover. It's a thing that, I mean, I've been advocating with clients for as long as I can remember, to not allow employees to carry over time from 1 year to the next. Or if you do allow them to carry over time from 1 year to the next, then either don't pay them out for time when they quit, or put some sort of cap on the amount of time that they can accrue, so people can't accrue 10 weeks of PTO and then get expect to be paid it out when they leave, because I mean, my gosh, that's a potentially a ton of money going to somebody who is not no longer going to offer you anything. And the other thing is paid time off. Really, if you look at it from a sickness and general health perspective, you want employees to use it. I mean, you want to encourage employees to use it. So doing a use it or lose it type of program is generally what I've always advocated, because you want employees to take vacations. It's good for them. It's potentially good for their work product, and not making as many mistakes if they're a little bit more relaxed and that sort of thing. And you don't want people coming in when they've got pretend chicken pox as well, right? Just because they don't have the paid time off. So forcing employees to use it and a use it or lose it makes a lot of sense. But these laws, most of these laws, if not all of them, are requiring that that at these cities like Minneapolis and St. Paul and Washington State and Arizona, they're mandating that you allow some amount of carryover from year to year. And so we'll look at a few of those, but that's something that a lot of employers probably have to change in their policies, even if they are offering paid time off in excess of what these new laws are saying. Here's a list of some of the cities and some of the states that are offering paid time off that have newer laws. Okay, so let's look at some of these. Again, there's going to be a bunch of overlap. So we'll just talk about some of the nuances that are worth knowing about with some of these states, because and not to be trite or anything, but these states are all stealing and borrowing these concepts from one another. I mean, these activists don't just stay in the state of California. They don't just stay in the state of Massachusetts. They get hired out as consultants to go and be activists in these other states and to help sell these schemes, these paid time off schemes, to the legislatures in other states. So I don't know for sure, but I would be not surprised whatsoever if activists in California who were successful, or legislators who pushed the bill in California that got this 1 hour for every 30 hours work scheme passed in California, because California was an early adopter of this, that legislator or those activists that were part and parcel of getting this successfully passed in California, I suspect they've been consulted and maybe even brought over to help advocate in like Massachusetts and Minnesota and other states that have looked at this at the legislative level. I mean, that's just how these things, they go to these people, they go to conferences, they work on these concepts. There's a reason that there's so much overlap. It's because they're all talking together. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing. It's not a bad thing at all. But we have a lot of uniformity at the state level, which is, interesting because uniformity is supposed to normally come at the federal level. But anyway, these states, there's a lot of uniformity. And we see this in other, like concealed carry laws and tons of laws that are passed every year, where these laws mirror exactly what other states have done in the past. Okay, so California, 1 hour for every 30 hours worked. That tends to be on the more employee-friendly side of the equation. So 1 hour earn 1 hour PTO for every 30 hours of work, and work is almost always defined in these laws as actual work, not unpaid leave like FMLA or military leave or something like that, or vacation days, holidays. It's got to be actual work. So 1 hour for every 30 hours worked. A lot of states and cities have gone with more like 1 hour for every 40 hours. One even has 1 hour for every 52 that we'll see. Cap, you can see what California does with the cap at 48 hours. Common, but again, 48 is a little bit, we're all shocked by this, that California is a little bit more employee friendly than most of the states. And most of the states that you're going to see, most of the states, you're going to look at a cap of around 40 hours. California goes the extra mile. You want to get that extra 6 a day. And in California, I guess that's why California is awesome. So there it is. Those flowers are really pretty on this beach. I wonder if this is actually a California beach. Anyway, and then you can also cap. So employers do have the ability to cap at that. Now, California, for every state, I'm not going to tell you exactly how it's defined, but California is very common with how they define an immediate family member. Some states will go beyond this, but this is a very common definition of what a family member is. So if the family member is sick and the employee needs to use the paid time off to go take care of that family member, then California and most states, you're going to look at this list. You're going to look at a defined list, but this is a very common. You're going to see a lot of overlap here. And again, this looks just like the FMLA, right? So if you have a serious health condition, it's a little bit more expensive than the FMLA, but if you have a serious health condition, or a child living at home with you, or under the age of 18, or a spouse or something like that, you can use FMLA. So they draw the definition for what, how, when, for whom is sick, when an employee can actually use the paid time off. And so we see here family members, immediate family members, children, parents, grandchildren, grandparents, spouses, registered domestic partners. That's very common these days as well, and siblings. So every state's going to be a little bit different, but I think you're going to see that 75–80% of these states and cities, that's the exact definition. So the employee doesn't have to be sick for themselves. They could also be just like all these people as well. Very similar to FMLA. And then so that's on the sickness side, and then we have safety, because really for most of these cities and states, we're looking at sickness and safety leave, safety being the newer concept. And then with that, we've got the reason that you could do it. So domestic violence, sexual assault, or stalking. And so that's when you can use the paid time off for that. So that's California. Massachusetts is a little bit more common with what they do, in that they give 1 hour off for every 40 hours of work. Massachusetts does have some exemptions, so it's not just every business like in California that has to offer this, but Massachusetts has 11 or more employees. So we're definitely in a much lower range, much smaller employers than we see with like FMLA coverage. Definitely. I mean, I don't know. I'm trying to think. I don't think any of these states or cities say that these paid time off laws are only in effect for businesses with 50 or more employees. Certainly not within a certain radius. So we're looking at these laws covering almost every employer in the state. with some nuance that we like see in Massachusetts and in Minneapolis and a couple other, I think Arizona off the top of my head, but we'll see as we go through the slides. And then what you see here with Massachusetts on that second paragraph is that it's unpaid sick leave. So if you're less than 11 employees, then in Minneapolis is so like I said with Minneapolis, the exact same way. So if you're less than 6 employees in Minneapolis, or in Massachusetts, if you're 10 or fewer employees, so you're a small business, you still need to offer job protected leave, but it can be unpaid. So it's only the employers with 11 or more employees that that have to offer paid sick leave. Unpaid otherwise if you're a smaller employer. Same thing in Minneapolis with 6 or more versus less than 6. Just a review of Massachusetts not being all that dissimilar from New York, where you can use it for your own sickness or for a family member's sickness. Definition of who an employee can use that sick leave or that safety leave for is very similar in Massachusetts to what we see in New York. I'm sorry, in California. Here's New York. So New York is the one where it's going to be different, right? So, excuse me, New York is going to have the insurance-based program. Here's are some specifics with the insurance-based program that that I didn't mention before. So one of the nice things is you can at least require that employees provide a lot of documentation on this. But this is what's interesting. So as far as the reimbursement goes, so you're a covered employee and you have a covered illness. Let's just say you give birth or something like that, and you want to take 12 weeks off. So in New York, you would make the claim. It would go to the employer. The employer would require documentation. It would be passed on to the carrier. The carrier would make the determination, and then within 18 days. There would be the carrier and the employer would reimburse the employee at this level. So so next year, so this takes effect January 1 next year, where the payments start to take effect, you would see a 50% reimbursement. So again, similar to what we see with short-term and long-term disability, depending on your policy, but we see a 50% reimbursement of the employee's average weekly wage repaid to them. It's going to increase all the way to 67%. So by 2021, assuming this law doesn't get overturned or something, employees are going to essentially get 2/3 of their wages reimbursed under the New York insurance plan. Now there's going to be some caps, and we'll look at that. You can see the leaves covered, so birth, adoption, foster care, serious medical, military leave as well. In New York, this is the amount of leave. So obviously you can't take off like the entire year, but employers are starting to charge the premium July 1 of this year. So, get your premiums all ramped up to start collecting, and then payments will begin effective for covered leaves, January 1, 2018. And then they're going to scale. So not only are they going to increase the benefit amount from starting at 50% in 2018 and then ending at 67 or about 2/3, so 67% in 2021, but the amounts of leave are going to increase as well. So the amount of leave that you're going to be able to get for reimbursable under the policy, it's going to increase as well. So in 2018, for example, in 2018, if you have a baby and say you're covered employee and everything like that, you have a baby and you want to take 12 weeks off of leave in New York, New York State, the first 8 weeks of that 12 weeks are going to be covered by this program, and so for those first 8 weeks you would receive 50% reimbursement. For the final 4 weeks that you're taking off, well, that's still in FMLA, still in effect here. So this person would still, for larger employers, would still be covered by FMLA. So the first 8 weeks, FMLA and everything, 50% reimbursement in 2018, and then the final 4 weeks of the FMLA there would be no reimbursement. You could still have short-term disability insurance coverage. Or even other paid time off on top of this, but you don't have to ever, I think there's a provision that says you don't get there's no entitlement to more than 100% of your typical wages. So you don't get this program is not intended to give you some sort of windfall because you're taking FMLA leave or something like that. So anyway, you can see how this is structured out until 2021, where if you have a baby and you want to take the full FMLA period of 12 weeks, assuming you have that amount of time left, you could get 12 weeks and you get 67% of your wages reimbursed for that full 12-week period. So the point is, if you're in New York, and you want to have babies and stuff, it'll be more lucrative to do it in 2021. So that's the only state where we see the insurance scheme. So the rest of the states and cities that we're going to talk about are all mandatory paid time off programs, or laws or schemes or whatever you want to call them. So Washington, so we're just going to go through this and we'll see, again, a lot of overlap, but it'll be informative for you if you have employees in these states. Excuse me. So again, Washington State, this began January of this year, so a few months ago, but there's no right for the employees to actually take the paid time off until January 1 of 2018. So why they did that, I have no idea, but basically we're looking at really implementing this in January 1, 2018. So we've got 1 hour for every 40 hours, again, more common. So what we see in Massachusetts, it's really California is one of the few states that does 1 hour for every 30 hours worked. There's no cap on earning, but there is, so if you work 5,000 hours, I don't know if that's even possible, but if you were to work 4,000 hours, you could technically get 100 hours of paid time off. So there's no cap. Most states have a cap, but say you work 4,000 hours and you get 100 hours, and you don't even have time to celebrate. I mean, this because you're working so much, but there's no cap on it. So you could get 100 hours, but then there is a cap on the carryover. So because you're working so hard, if you get that 100 hours, you can only carry over up to 40 hours of work per year. So Washington State is similar to the other states, where it's the employee sickness and the immediate family member sickness. There is an exemption for employees, so this is a nuance in Washington State. So if you're exempt from the minimum wage in Washington, and I'm not familiar enough with Washington state law to know if that mirrors what we see under the Fair Labor Standards Act at the federal level with exemptions, but if you are exempt under the minimum wage laws in the state of Washington, you are exempt from this law, so you actually aren't entitled to PTO. There is, and we see this in a lot of these states and jurisdictions, there is a provision that says you cannot, you can, as an employer, you can restrict employees from using this paid time off until after their probationary, 90-day type of period. Some states and cities will say 120 days. I don't know. I don't know why they, what the magic is between 90 and 120, unless it has something to do with unemployment eligibility in those states. And just to be clear, in Seattle and Spokane, I never know how you pronounce. I think it's Spokane. I hear Spokane, but I think it's Spokane. Anyway, those cities actually have their own laws that are even more generous than this. So there are provisions, whereas in Minnesota, the legislature has been trying to pass, it's not going to happen this year, but they've been trying to pass a law that says that, hey, cities and counties in Minnesota don't get to have more favorable laws than the state, and that's going to be a failure in Minnesota this year, but Washington has the exact opposite. Washington's law says no, it's entirely okay that Seattle and Spokane want to do even more for employees. So no preemption on that. Okay, so Connecticut has one of the oldest, old like 2012, one of the oldest paid time off policies. But I was wrong. Okay, so my bad. So Connecticut is the one state that does have more of an FMLA threshold for just larger employers. There is a major exemption for manufacturers, nonprofits, and temporary and day laborers. So, how many employers in Connecticut actually have more than 50 employees? I don't know. I suspect it's not a great number, but anyway, for those employers, if you do have more than 50 employees in the state of Connecticut, and you're not a manufacturer or a nonprofit, or the person's not a temporary day laborer, then they're entitled to the scheme of one for every 40 hours worked. They start earning right away, but again, they can't use it until 680 hours have passed. Why 680? I have no concept. It doesn't make any sense to me, but that's okay. That's why I'm not at the legislature. But anyway, people can't. They start earning it right away, but they can't use it in Connecticut right away. They can use safety, but Connecticut doesn't allow you to use it to help other people in their safety. So immediate family members doesn't matter. You can let them go and get domestically abused and go to court and stuff like that. You can't use the paid time off for those. But if you need to personally in Connecticut go to, or your employee needs to go to court or do stuff because they've been to guarantee their safety, then they can use the paid time off for that. Vermont, again, another mandatory paid time off. I think we're just going to cover the entire East Coast here for the most part. We're just going to jump from coast to coast because that's basically, those are the only states that have these schemes. There's no, I'm trying to think. I don't think there's any state in kind of like the middle of the United States, like the rest of the United States. Arizona, I mean, it's still West Coast. It's still out there in the West. So that's otherwise we're talking about coastal states and then cities here and there. Vermont has the highest or the least employee friendly framework, where it's 1 hour for every hour worked. They get 52 hours. And then the nice thing with Vermont for employers is that they can actually restrict so the employee isn't entitled to use it in the first year of employee. So you can kind of let the employees, it's nice that they're not eligible right away. Even though they might earn it, they can't actually use it. And then Vermont does have the other, again, these are pretty reasonable stipulations, I would say, that Vermont and Connecticut have, but again, I'm biased. In Vermont says that the person has to work at least 20 hours, 20 work weeks for you, and then they have to have averaged over those 20 or more hour weeks. They have to have averaged at least 18 hours per week. So to me, that makes a lot of sense. But unfortunately, a lot of other states haven't adopted that sort of limitation with regard to employee eligibility, and they've gone more into the all employees are eligible no matter how many hours they work. They just don't earn as much. And then Vermont does have a cap, so they're phasing this in, and so they allow for 24 hours of earning, and that's the maximum number that they're entitled to in this year and next year, and then it's going to go up. It's going to phase up to 40 hours in 2018, and they do have unlimited carryover, which is a little less common, but so you can carry over as much as you want, but you're still capped at the number, so the employer can still cap the employee at the number of hours that they can actually use the PTO. So they're still going to be capped at 40 hours per week, even if they've, if we're in like 2020 or something like that, and the person has in their bank like 120 hours, they're still going to be capped at using 40 hours per week. And then you can see when this takes effect, which for larger employers it took effect in January, and then for smaller employers it'll be 2018. Arizona. I think we're still going to call Arizona the West. So it's not, Pacific Northwest or anything, but still out there. So Arizona, it's going to pay time off scheme with Arizona. Arizona, like California, goes with the 1 hour for every 30 hours of work. Arizona does differentiate between larger employers and smaller employers with the amount of paid time off that they have to allow employees to earn. So in Arizona, if you're a business with 15 or more employees, you have to allow the employee under this framework to earn up to 40 hours per year. So I guess at every 30 hours, that's what, like 1,200 hours. So an employee, if an employee works 1,200 hours or more, they're going to get 40 hours per week. If an employer wants to give more than 40 hours, that's great, but they don't have to. So you're just looking at 40 for 50. And then if the employer is a little smaller with less than 15 employees, then you can actually cap it at 24 at 24 hours per year earned and used. So larger employers have a higher cap than smaller employers, and this whole thing begins in about 6 weeks. And then one of the interesting things that I thought I put in here, because we see this in a few of the other states, is that Arizona talks about the immediate family member being related by blood or affinity. So I don't entirely know what they mean by affinity, but I'm sure it's important, and that's how Arizona rolls. New York City, we're going to move to cities now. So we're off the states and we're into the cities. Although I thought I had another, sorry, I'm just rifling through these. I thought I had, okay. Thought I did something with Oregon. Anyway, okay, New York City. Unlike the New York state, New York City has a mandatory paid time off, and so you can see the how we do this. And so New York City is similar in that they're California and Arizona, where it's 1 hour for every 30 hours worked. Employers with 5 or more employees in New York have to allow employees to earn up to 40 hours of paid time off per year. If you're less than 5 employees, it's going to be unpaid time off. So that 40 hours has to be unpaid time off, and it's just like what we have in Minneapolis coming up on July 1 in Minneapolis. So it's going to be, except that's like 5 or less employees, and so it's the same thing. So earn up to 40 hours per year in paid time off if you're a little bit larger business, but if you're a super small business, then it's going to be unpaid time off. New York City allows for carryover. But again, like these other states, you can allow for the carryover, and the employee can carry over. Well, I guess you can only never carry over more than 40 hours in New York City, but an employer never has to allow an employee to use more than 40 hours, excuse me, per year of the paid time off. There are some exemptions in New York City for students and independent contractors, that sort of thing. And then in New York City, they don't allow for safety leave, and you can prohibit an employee from using it in the first 120 days. So probationary type of period. But yeah, it's interesting and a little bit more unique that New York City doesn't allow for any sort of safety leave. Chicago is more similar to what we're going to see in St. Paul and what we see in a lot of these cities than what we see in Minneapolis. So anyway, Chicago and Cook County, they both passed their own laws. It's weird. If any, raise your, I can't see anybody, but, raise your hands if anybody's surprised that the government and in any sort of government level of Illinois is, wacky. Chicago, Cook County not being any different. So it's written, their laws are written poorly, they're written a little bit differently, but they do take effect July 1, and you're going to, in Chicago and Cook County, you're going to earn 5 days of paid time off per year. There's going to be a carryover of half of that, so up to 2.5 days that can be carried over per year, and it's only covering work in the city limits. Here's the carryover slide. It is for sick and safety leave, and the employee is not entitled to use it in the first 6 months of employment. So that's a really long probationary period for this law, but you can basically accrue but not use it for that first 6 months of employment. And like Minneapolis, St. Paul, and a lot of these states and cities, even though you have the accrual, if the person has a bank of it at the time of the termination of their employment, whether it's voluntary or involuntary, there's no requirement that you pay out the bank. So we have that in Minneapolis, St. Paul as well. Chicago's got that taking effect in a few weeks. A lot of these, I didn't put it in every slide, but a lot of these cities and states say the same. Like, you can have an accrual, you can have a carryover, but there's no entitlement to pay out at the time of, because really the whole concept is that this is for sick and safety leave. excuse me, and you want employees to use it so that they stop being sick and coming into work, and they become more productive and that sort of thing. Here's a definition of how Chicago looks at what is an employee and an employee member and an immediate family member. And again, very similar to what we see. We include domestic partners because that's the thing to do. Chicago talks about legal guardians and wards. That makes me think of Batman, but I guess that's where they are. I think Batman was filmed in Chicago. Maybe that had some sort of influence on it. But otherwise, we're looking at siblings, grandparents, grandchildren, obviously children and spouses, that sort of thing. I've got 5 minutes left. We're going to talk about Minneapolis and St. Paul, which actually are very, very similar to everything else, so this is not going to take too much time. Minneapolis is going to take effect on July 1. Similar to a lot of the other ones, it's a mandatory paid time off scheme. It only covers employers with 6 or more employees, but then if you have fewer than that, then you have to offer unpaid time off to the employees. Only covers employees that are working within the city limits of St. Paul, and employers that have, this was a lawsuit that the city of Minneapolis won part of and lost part of, but one of the parts where they lost in is that it is not going to cover employers. So employers outside the city limits of Minneapolis do not need to offer this sort of paid time off. It is only to cover employers within the city limits of Minneapolis. So that was a big victory, narrowing down the scope of this Minneapolis law, which is great. Makes it much easier for employers that are sending employees, employers from the suburbs or Chicago or New York or wherever that are sending employees to work in Minneapolis as like consultants and that sort of thing, so that they don't have to worry so much about complying with this law just because their employees worked a little bit in the city limits of Minneapolis. It also is a good reason for a lot of Minneapolis employers to just pack up and move right over the city lines to one of the suburbs or something like that. There are some nuances with new businesses in Minneapolis, and then don't want to get too much into it, but then at the bottom of this you can see that we're talking about less than 6 employees. You still have to accrue and still follow these rules, but the time off is unpaid. So like FMLA, it basically is like a mini FMLA for smaller employers, whereas only FMLA only covers employers with 50 or more employees. Minneapolis, like California and what we're seeing like New York City and stuff, 1 hour for every 30 hours a week worked. Minneapolis takes from the California model. This looks just like the California model. 48 hours of accrual per calendar year, allow for the carryover, 80 hours of maximum accrual. So if somebody, while you have a maximum of 80 hours per year, if somebody wants to carry over, they can actually get up to 80 hours. So, oh my gosh, that's like 2 full weeks of paid time off. Minneapolis allows for some sort of documentation, like a lot of these states and these cities do, where you can require that employees bring in documentation. For exempt employees, Fair Labor Standards Act exempt employees, there's an assumption that they're working 40 hours per week unless it's somehow being otherwise tracked by you. Minneapolis, like St. Paul, Minneapolis and St. Paul, their laws mirror each other except for a couple minor differences. But they're both there for the employee's sickness, and you can see the definition of like what includes on this page, what includes sickness, but it's the employee's sickness as well as the sickness for an immediate family member. And then we also have the safety leave. Yeah, here's the safety leave slide. So the safety leave, so this in a safety context, if you want to use the paid time off that's been accrued, these are the circumstances and the situation. And what I would say is that actually for cities, Minneapolis and St. Paul, because they're a little bit later to the game than like California, New York City, and Massachusetts and stuff like that, they're a little bit later to the game. They've actually drafted fairly detailed language as opposed to like who's covered and how are they covered. So it's actually it's well written, well schemed paid time off laws, especially for at such a low level of at the municipal level of government compared to like state and federal level. St. Paul, very similar. I don't want to completely repeat exactly that I've said. The only difference in St. Paul is that larger employers of 24 or more employees, it's going to take effect on July 1. So in a few weeks, just like Minneapolis. Minneapolis, all employers, is going to take effect July 1. But for smaller employers, we're looking at January 1 of 2018 in St. Paul. And the big difference in St. Paul is that whereas Minneapolis says, well, you have to have 6 or more employees to be covered by this with the paid time off, but if you have less than 6 employees, like we've seen in some of these other states and cities that we've talked about, less than 6 employees, it's unpaid time off. St. Paul says, hey, we're better. Our mayor's going to run for governor. We want him to run on something. We're going to cover all employers regardless of the size. So if you have 1 employee, you're going to have to offer paid time off. The paid time off is going to be just like it is in California and Minneapolis, where up to 48 hours a year, earning at 1 hour for every 30 hours worked. Sounds very similar. You get to accrue, you get to use. There's a limitation on when you can start to use it, but Minneapolis and St. Paul are otherwise very, very similar, which is very similar to California, which is very similar to New York City. There's a lot of incestuous legislative sharing among all of these cities and states. That's it. I think I have a slide or 2 more that people in St. Paul, if you're interested, you can look at, but I don't think anybody else really needs to know or cares. Yes, right. I can't remember what our next month seminar is in June. The wonderful Stephanie Rojo will be giving that presentation, so my voice gets a break for a month, and she'll be talking about ADA accommodation laws with regard to accessibility. So not just like with employees, but access ADA that we often don't talk about as labor and employment attorneys. So thank you for your time today. This will be available on the website for HR Hotline members. I appreciate it. You're welcome to reach out to me with any questions that you have, and I hope you have a nice month.